We're honored to be back with Mary Holland, a friend of the show, a friend of the network, the president of Children's Health Defense. And we couldn't think of anybody better to get a good idea of what's happening with the recent activity in HHS, with Trump, with the vaccines, with CDC. Mary, thank you for coming on.
Delighted to be here.
Well, let's just get right to it. What is your thoughts on the recent autism disclosures?
Todd, it's historic, right?
Mm-hmm.
No president for decades has ever talked from the Roosevelt room, from the White House, about autism. And President Trump really did let loose. It was clearly extemporaneous, but what he did was not only suggest that precaution means that pregnant women should not be taking Tylenol. We should do much more research on acetaminophen or paracetamol. And autism. But more importantly, he really then drilled into vaccines. And he said, we shouldn't be giving babies hepatitis B shots on the day of birth. We should push that back to age 12. We're glad that we're getting rid of mercury. We should get rid of aluminum. That happens to be in 22 shots right now. We should be spacing out the vaccine. So it was very clear by implication that President Trump considers autism to be causally related with vaccines. And then he said, most importantly to me, this is what my presidency is about. I don't care about the economy and nonsense. I will measure my legacy by whether we end the autism epidemic. I want it to be 1 in 10,000, none in 20,000. I mean, that blew me away, Todd. It actually blew me away.
Well, I've known you for some time, and you have a vaccine-injured child.
I do. I have a vaccine-injured young adult and not so young adult. And I've been at this for over 25 years. So for me to hear from the president that this is a number one concern and it affects the U.S. and the world, I mean, it was breathtaking. It was really stunning, Todd. I didn't expect to hear that, frankly, with the rollout that this was going to be about Tylenol. I didn't expect that the president was going to get way out in front of what Bobby Kennedy has done and said. And one of the things it showed us that was so important as there's this continuing effort to undermine Secretary Kennedy and get rid of him and get him out of HHS. What it showed to me is there really is no distance between President Trump and Secretary Kennedy on this issue, which I think was very important in sort of communicating to pharma. If you were looking to drive a wedge, you've been totally unsuccessful.
Wow. Bill?
So you mentioned Bobby Kennedy. We've reported extensively, both when he announced that there would be forthcoming information in September. We also showed just this week again the segment where he discussed with Tucker Carlson how important autism is, and not just because of its growth, but because of the horrendous, devastating effects on these kids' lives. And you could tell that he was very emotionally engaged in it and portrayed it such that the audience could tell that this is one of the reasons this is so important is because of the depth of family pain, the depth of impact on these poor kids' lives. Were you surprised that, that they didn't go into some more of the effects? The moms talked about it, I think, a bit. But I was almost anticipating them to reinforce just how troubling these effects can be. Were you surprised they didn't go there?
No, I wasn't really surprised by that. Back in April, you'll remember that when Secretary Kennedy had the press conference about the new numbers from CDC of 1 in 31 8-year-olds, he talked about the devastation of profound autism, and he didn't label it as such. We actually went out with a video really showing profound autism. And, there's a wide spectrum. Autism is really, what I like to say is it's a toxin-induced brain injury. And there's a wide scope of different types of brain injuries that we all call autism, which is exclusively a behavioral diagnosis. So I think there is and should be continuing focus on profound autism. And really the start of this epidemic was with this law that Congress passed that gave manufacturers complete liability protection in the healthcare profession. And so we have people who are now in their 30s who've been affected by this. And it's as parents die off, this is going to be a huge issue. And so I'm very pleased that I do believe that Secretary Kennedy and President Trump are really, they understand the issue and they are committed to trying to help alleviate some of the problems.
Yeah.
What have you seen as the reaction from industry, Mary, or has there been any to this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, industry, you know, I think it's important that there was a leaked memo and the Brownstone Institute published it in April. And it was from the bio lobbying group, the biopharmaceutical industry. And they, in that memo, say they were committing $2 million to ousting Kennedy and getting rid of him so that the industry could thrive. I mean, what they are talking about absolutely undercuts the industry, because the reality is if a child is vaccine injured and develops any of the myriad autoimmune, neuropsychiatric things that happen, then pharma has clients for life, right? It's a racket. It is literally a protection racket. And so if you stop forcing people to vaccinate, and if you start disclosing to people the genuine hazards of mass vaccination and hyper-vaccination, then this pool of money, not only around vaccines ends, but as a loss leader, it ends for the clients for life. So pharma is pushing back mightily. You know, vaccines, there's no connection with Tylenol, but, you know, Bobby Kennedy is still wacko and crazy. And, you know, I think I personally am pretty used to this. Bobby Kennedy is surely very used to it. This is, these are just kind of desperation cries and hand wringing. You know, we saw pharma last week, you know, in the media, they're kind of pushing back and attacking. But at the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices that met last Thursday, Friday, there were representatives of Pfizer and Moderna there. And when questions were posed to them, well, what about this contamination in the vaccines? What about the myocarditis link? You know, they had nothing to say, Todd. They had nothing to say. So I think this is not going to be easy to untangle, but pharma is under the gun, as they should be, because we have all been under the needle for a long time, and it's time to kind of turn that around.
Let me ask one more question, but I'll turn it to you, Bill. What about the CDC, the drama that's going on there? Funny enough, the day after the announcement from Trump, I got a 15-minute survey from the CDC on the phone. Like, what do you think about vaccines? Essentially, I mean, so you're right. They're worried, right?
Yeah. Well, they should. I mean, you know, I was just at a meeting where people were pointing out, you know, the CDC has a $9 billion budget, and the most, you know, basic things like looking at vaxxed, unvaxxed studies, or looking at whether Tylenol is associated with autism. Like with $9 billion, they don't do that. As Bobby Kennedy pointed out in an op-ed recently, 1 in 10 people at CDC is an epidemiologist. That's what it was created for, was epidemiology around infectious disease. So it's lost its way. There's a bureaucratic bloat. You know, we saw this whole craziness with, you know, Kennedy terminating the director, Menara, saying, look, you're not aligned. You don't want to follow this, what, you know, you're going to push back against this advisory committee that I have just created, you know, so they parted ways, and then she gets a hearing in the Senate. And, you know, to my mind, this was all kind of theater. This was really political theater. Obviously, the secretary has the authority to terminate somebody who explicitly tells the secretary, I'm not going to follow your agenda. I mean, you know, what do? You say, okay, fine, let's part ways. So, but the CDC is a bloated organization, Todd, that has completely not been aligned with the kind of science that Kennedy wants to do. And I don't envy his job. He now has as an acting director, Jim O'Neill, who had been at HHS. But again, he's not a doctor. He's not from a medical background. He's aligned by all appearances, but it's a huge agency with a huge budget that at the moment is completely unaligned. And so we saw these demonstrations of these employees who don't want to follow Kennedy. They made a lot about this attacker who, you know, had nothing to do with Kennedy, but it's a mess.
Yeah, I think it's a mess. Bill?
Well, staying with the CDC for just a moment, it is notable that they've just been sued. and they've been sued specifically regarding the vaccination schedule. The plaintiffs appear to be claiming that there's some sort of a shadow mandate going on here, an unseen agenda behind the scenes. Given the number of years you and the organization have watched this, is that possible? Do you think? Is there an underlying thing going on here?
Yeah, so that's a case that's been brought by attorney Rick Jaffe on behalf of two de-licensed pediatricians, Paul Thomas, Ken Stoller, and also a friendly organization that Stand for Health Freedom. And we absolutely support that effort. And that is that the CDC has been told twice in the 2000s, 2004 and 12, I believe, by the Institute of Medicine, now called the National Academy of Medicine, you must look at these potential vaccine injuries. You must do a comparison of vaccinated to unvaccinated children. And they don't do it, right? The last one was over 10 years ago. And they have never in any reasonable manner looked at the safety of the whole ballooning childhood vaccine schedule that's now well over 70 vaccines. It can be anywhere between about 70 and 100 by the time a child reaches age 18. And so the lawsuit alleges that it cannot be recommended for all. And it correctly points out that the federal recommendations from the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, that's the basis in every state, in every one of the 50 states for the state for the state mandates for vaccinations. And so what the lawsuit is saying is that this can no longer be universally recommended given its lack of safety testing. It must be shared decision-making. And if we reduce that kind of from a universal recommendation to a shared decision-making, then it's one more step to an individual decision-making. And then we get to a place where we may not have the liability shield. What we've seen with the COVID shots for children is we went from this year, universal recommendation, to shared decision-making, to now individual decision-making at the last meeting. So it's a very significant challenge, in my view, to the CDC, and they will have to respond in some way in October.
Wow.
The other note is that your organization has done an immense amount of work for a long period of time looking into a number of different conditions, autism obviously being one, but there now appears to be this broadening sense of other conditions that are in many ways perhaps even more urgent. Myocarditis, you mentioned earlier. The McCullough Institute, along with their epidemiologist, Nick Hulsher, has published a number of things and just got through publishing an updated autism chart, but they're focusing on there may be myriad conditions that are being driven by these vaccines. And we're just now discovering, for example, the breadth of gene expression changes and other things that might be driving that. Right. Has your organization been able to begin looking into this? Is this a track you all are looking at? And what are your impressions there?
Yes. In fact, I was just with Peter McCullough and Nick Hulsher a couple of days ago, and I'm really happy that the McCullough Foundation is really doing a deep dive, looking at case series. And the publication they just came out with that I think you're referencing was a case of a 31-year-old woman who developed stage 4 bladder cancer, and the genomic sequence in her Moderna shots is identical to what was in the cancer. Wow. So we're seeing really clear evidence that the COVID shots, the mRNA, messenger RNA COVID shots in particular, are related, are causing the turbo cancers that we're seeing. And they're also probably causing the kinds of Parkinson's / Alzheimer's that we're seeing, and the heart attacks and strokes. Wow. And remember that these mRNA shots, they are not vaccines. They had to change the definition at the CDC. These are gene therapies, full stop. They were called gene therapies when they were being used exclusively for people with pretty advanced cancer. They were literally rebranded so that they would be eligible to get all of the kinds of liability protections and all of the mandate protection that goes along with vaccines. So I think that the COVID shots, the AstraZeneca, which is a different technology, it's a adenovirus, but the COVID shots are in a class all of their own. And my understanding is that, the McCullough Foundation has been looking at at that as we have. But the McCullough Foundation is also now starting really to look at all of the adverse events that have happened from regular childhood vaccines. And what is similar is they can cause neurological harm, autoimmune harm, heart harm, you name it, basically. So I think it's absolutely essential that we start really looking at the risk side of vaccination. We've always been told about safe and effective, save millions of lives. We always look at the benefit side, but literally the risk side, the hazard side, the downside has been censored. And I think that's starting to change.
Yeah.
Is that a vector of attack to try to stop some of this stuff, like the law change you mentioned, where they changed the definition of a vaccine? I mean, can you have immunity for something that may not even be a vaccine?
Well, I think it's, Todd, it's a good question. So one of the things that's so troubling about COVID is really over the last many decades, you see when you look at it carefully that things were put into place so that something like a COVID, everything being done on an emergency basis, everything being considered a covered countermeasure with no accountability anywhere in the system. You can see that that was slowly put into place, that there were building blocks along the way. It's not going to be overnight to undo that. Is it, just to say you misbranded it? I mean, we've done that in several lawsuits so far, Todd, and so far they're not winning because there is what I would consider a pseudo legal basis or an unconstitutional legal basis for a lot of what was done. The PrEP Act is absolutely unconstitutional. I think the 1986 Act is absolutely unconstitutional, but Congress passed them. So, and Congress, candidly, kudos to Senator Ron Johnson, who is on this and who's really been looking at the COVID harms and then now the childhood harms. But other than Senator Johnson, pretty hard to find anybody in Congress who really is digging deep on this. But I would have to say there's more interest than there's ever been. I've been in this world a long time. There's definitely more of a readiness and openness than there's ever been. But it's not yet at a place where we could pass legislation.
So I was listening to Tucker, who said, and this was interesting to me, that he said Johnson sat down with Trump on the plane and explained all of this to him, which was fabulous to hear. The science is interesting to me because, Bill and I were talking before the show, and they didn't come at the vaccines directly in the announcement. It was more kind of from the side and, talking.
Right.
And so is this kind of teeing up clinical trials for the vaccines? Is that what Bobby's doing?
Well, I don't think he's really doing, I hope he's not doing clinical trials right now, Todd. I mean, he has vast amounts of information. It's really more getting people to be able to properly analyze it and getting that information. So there's something called the Vaccine Safety Data Link. It has 10 million, records of children, both vaccinated and unvaccinated. So it's not been easy, apparently, for him to unlock the keys within the FDA and the CDC. But I think preliminarily what he's having people do is analyze existing data from Medicaid, from Medicare, from the Vaccine Safety Data Lake, from VSafe. And then that may be the basis for clinical trials. But, they've committed to doing more research, which is great. Of course, it's important who does it and what they actually do. But they are committed to, I do believe that, as we saw in that press conference on Monday, the president and Secretary Kennedy are really aligned. Like, we have got to investigate these medical interventions that we're imposing on everybody in the country on a repeated basis. If we don't know what the safety profile is of these things, this is insane. Literally, this is insane.
Bill?
One of the things I found fascinating was that he brought up the Amish and noted that he noted that Secretary Kennedy is sometimes cautious in his language and statements, but the president was like, "Well, I don't have to be cautious. They have none of these problems," and it is fascinating. It's almost as if, to get around the numerical science that underpins many of these things, he's putting forth a common sense observation that is very difficult to get around. How would you explain a given population having almost no incidence of autism, and in fact, an absence of many of these other conditions that might be driven in the same way? it's almost as if the normal person could grasp that without having to go into all the detail. What were you? How did you find that comment that he made?
Oh, I thought it was fantastic. So a really important journalist in our world, Dan Olmsted, who sadly is not with us, literally over 20 years ago, went and did an investigation in Amish country in Pennsylvania and did not find a single child with autism except one. And it turned out that that child had been adopted into the Amish community and had been vaccinated early on in life.
Wow.
So, there have been studies. Also, there's a very important lawsuit right now before the Supreme Court. We don't know if it's going to be accepted or not, but it is on behalf of Amish schools who would not require vaccinations of their children because they do not believe in this modern technology.
Mm-hmm.
And President Trump is exactly right. The Amish communities eat real food. They don't eat ultra processed food. They don't take vaccinations. And they live healthy lifestyles outdoors in the sun, good food, community, and none of this over medicalization. And they're incredibly healthy. So I think President Trump even talked about common sense, and he did. He just cut out all the mumbo jumbo, right? Like for women about Tylenol, tough it out. And the Amish are healthy. They don't have autism. I mean, kudos to President Trump for just putting it out there in a way that people can understand.
As you say, there's a number of lessons to be learned. They have almost no obesity. And it's fascinating that they lead such simple lives. I've been fortunate enough to visit Amish country on a couple of occasions, and they're most people would call them the salt of the earth. They're just good folks.
Absolutely. I think it was 2019. I went with currently Secretary Kennedy to Amish country in Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
and he spoke to a large family day where they invite people from the English, the people from outside, and the people are healthy, and they were really interested to hear what then Bobby Kennedy at CHD had to say.
Yeah.
It's a natural, people in other countries too, Bill. One of the things that Bobby has made really clear is like we had a much higher mortality rate from COVID. Our people are just sicker. Mm-hmm. We have this incredible chronic disease burden that most people everywhere else in the world don't have. Mm-hmm. And not to see a potential connection between this hyper vaccination and hyper medicalization and poor diet in the sense of ultra processed food. It's just, it's keeping our heads in the sand. We can't afford to do that anymore.
Yeah. You mentioned just one follow-up question, if I could, Todd. So you mentioned mRNA earlier, and we've come to kind of think of COVID vaccines as the main source of mRNA introduction into our bodies. Yeah. Yet there are other vectors that are emerging, aren't there? There's pet medications. 100%. There are certain agricultural products. In your thinking, do these represent potentially just the same kind of concerns?
It's very concerning. mRNA shots are in use in animal populations already for several years, in pork and in pigs in particular. And they've now, I believe, authorized self-amplifying mRNA shots. So the idea that they're intended to shed to other animals. So this is all very concerning. I don't know that it presents the same risk as being injected into your body. I think it's probably a lesser risk, but it's not yet labeled. It's not required to be labeled, which then really does suggest that when you buy organic, that is really probably the best protection you have against unknown additives, particularly in conventional meats.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we got a couple more minutes here. I know you have to go, but speaking of lawsuits, you may not want to talk about this, but the one we have against the Trusted News Initiative, you're still involved. CSD still involved. Absolutely. Is there an update on that? I know that September 10th was their filing day.
So the update, I think what you're referencing is an antitrust lawsuit that Children's Health Defense, Creative Destruction Media, and several others, Truth About Cancer, we filed against Legacy Media because they were colluding with social media to censor us for financial reasons. They were very explicit in their documents called Creating This Trusted News Initiative that they wanted to squelch us because we were eating their lunch. They wanted to be the only trusted ones. And if one of them said that's a trustworthy source, because they didn't like what we had to say, they would all squelch us simultaneously. So the great news was that the Department of Justice under the Trump administration put in a letter of interest saying this is important and this is a legitimate antitrust issue, and censorship of speech in this way is an antitrust violation. So we then had to wait for after DOJ put in their memo, then we have to wait for the legacy media to put in their memo, BBC, Reuters, Washington Post, and then we put in one. And so it's just sort of slowly going forward. But the case has now been waiting for a couple of years before the District of Columbia judge. And so I think we will get a decision within the next 6 months, Todd, and then we'll go from there.
Holy cow. I have one more question. Bill, do you want to say anything else before we go?
No, I just wanted to, I guess, one question, a very short one. As folks begin to get their heads wrapped around this, your organization and others, I'm sure, will have more information that they need to know. Where would you recommend that they go to find that? How should they best follow up and learn more?
Sure, thanks. So our website, childrenshealthdefense.org, has a tremendous amount of information on it. We also have a free daily newsletter, The Defender. We pride ourselves on really putting out top quality information. We have a streaming platform that goes out every day, CHD TV, and we are on X, social media, Children's HD. So please come and use our resources. Sign up, become an insider where you can donate, and then you get some special access. We're really doing a lot. And I should say that we're having a conference November 7th to 9th this fall in Austin, Texas, where, among others, we will have Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Rand Paul, Surgeon General Joe Ladapo, and many other luminaries in the health freedom world.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Stephanie sent me an email. I think we're going to help try to sponsor that if there's still some
that'd be fantastic.
left.
Great.
So tell us more about that conference. What is
so there's kind of a welcome reception on Friday, November 7th, but then all day Saturday the 8th and until about 4 p.m. on Sunday the 9th, we will have a jam-packed schedule. Russell Brand will be there. He will be doing some comedy on Saturday night, but we have leading scientists, Pierre Corey, we have Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, we have Dr. Jessica Rose. We'll also have a convening of the 4 people who made the film that really was an important catalyst in the movement. Andy Wakefield, Del Bigtree, Polly Tommy, Brian Hooker. They'll have a panel. We're going to have a panel with young adults who are non-speakers and really having them communicate their perspective on the world, which is really an important perspective. People who've been diagnosed with autism. We'll be talking about the media. We'll be talking about the censorship. We'll be talking about the science. We'll be talking about the medicine. We'll be talking about the legal dimensions of what's going on. And we really will be hearing from some of the top people in the world on these issues.
Mary, thank you for your time. I know you're busy. Got to let you go. Take care.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.